science, kinang they need facts and evidence, and before na sila i-release or i-share their studies, ikuan sa na siya kanang they must be i-argue pa na siya with the co-scientist. So mo to siya kuan sort of panimula char joke. So let's proceed to the learning objectives. So my learning in the end of my discussion, you will be able to understand that we use scientific arguments to answer scientific questions and to be able to distinguish between questions that can or cannot be addressed by science, and to understand that a scientific argument includes a claim, evidence, and reasoning. So, what is argument? Argument, it is a disagreement between people about some issues they feel is important. So in our everyday living, we communicate with people and we interact with different people, and we can't deny that we have some argument with them. Bisag dili nato di jud nato nakalikayan ng argument. But in scientific argument or kanang argue with science, it is different from kanang ato ang everyday living nga argument ra sa atong pang-adlaw-adlaw. It is really different. So let's proceed with what is argumentation. So what is argumentation anyway? The art of persuading others to think or act in a definite way, orally or in writing. So when we say persuading is kana ba ganing to catch or to get their attention, to get their beliefs, kana ba mutuo sila nimo ba to get them in ana in the process of proving or disproving a proposition. Reason of giving in communicative situations by people whose purpose is the justification of acts, belief, attitude, and values freely. So in argumentation, you need to prove prove people or individual of what you are kanang proposed all about, or unsay ganani mo nga patunayan nga sakto ka or ana. So let's proceed to what is scientific argument. Scientific argument is defined as people disagreeing about scientific explanations or claim using empirical data or evidence to justify their side of the argument. So in scientific argumentation, of course, nana siya claim or your kanang imong gi-oppose nga imong reklamo, and using empirical data, of course, evidence, of course, if naa kay reklamo, na jud kay enough evidence, and to justify, which is reasoning, kanang i-reason out nimo kung unsa imong reklamo with together with your evidence. So scientific argument is a process that scientists follow to guide their research activities. So as I said a while ago, that before i-release ang studies sa mga scientists, it must be agreed by their co-scientists, which is dili na siya dali nga mapunta sa or maipon to the body of knowledge. It must have a lot of time and process. Do you get it, guys? Or do you understand? Hello? Thank you. So, since you already understand about scientific argument, let's proceed to the evidence-based argument. So, before, as I said, if naa kay claim, you also need an evidence. Kay basta-basta na lang kang magreklamo diha without any evidence, without proving them, how can you persuade somebody or your co-scientist nga you're studying the right or kanang correct imong studies than them. So kinahanglan na siya evidence. So ang evidence, it is the weaknesses and limitation in other argument with the ultimate goal of refining and improving scientific explanations and experimental design. So when we say weaknesses, of course, if your studies is wala na siya evidence, of course, weak jud na siya. Then limitations, of course, in in scientific studies, you must have enough information that prove your studies is kanang right or angay ba o sakto ba na siya nga pagka studies char joke. Then understood guys? Okay. Let's proceed to the three components. Okay, thank you. Let's proceed to the three components of scientific arguments. The first one is the claim or the explanation. So, your claim is an explanation or an answer to a research question. So, in research, 'di ba, we encountered already in making research and 'di ba sa atong grade 11 and grade 12. And so, ang imong claim, muna siya mo answer sa imong research question kay kanang sa research nato di ba naman jud na siya yung mga research questions. It is a must man jud nang naatay research question, di ba? So muna ang claim muna siya explanation sa ato ang explanation or answer sa ato ang research question. Then the second component is the evidence or the observation. So, observation that shows time or relationships between variables. So, in our research, of course, na jud tay observation nga nahitabo kay naman na siya, di ba, factual man jud ang research, not just mag-research ka diha kanang kanang imong research is without any sense kung wala na siya evidence or walay observation nga nahitabo. Then the last one is the rationale or the reasoning. So, reasoning that explain the evidence and why it support the claim. So, ang imong reasoning muna siya ga-explain or ga-reason out sa imong evidence nga which is supported by your claim. Understood? The three components. Then, let's proceed to the scientific argumentation. Scientific argumentation use evidence and data rather than belief or opinion to support a claim. Because evidence and data can be empirically re-examined and retested rather than belief or opinions, no matter how strongly held, cannot be empirically verified. So, in scientific studies, dili juga basta-basta lang moingon nga, I believe and my opinion is I am ano ba mga ana ba nga imuhang opinion ang imong gi basihan. So, in scientific studies, so needs na siya og evidence and data rather than belief or opinion. Ouch. Let's proceed to the characteristic of scientific arguments and everyday argument. So, plus expectations plus observation equals scientific argument. Okay, it must be composed with these three: scientific idea, explanations, and observation para maka-create ka og scientific argumentation. Taken together, the expectation generated by a scientific idea and the actual observation relevant to those expectations form what we call a scientific argument. So, let's just take a look this illustration. The logic of argument. So, hypothesis, results or observations, then actual results observation. So, ang imong idea is life is built from cells. Then ang imong expectation that we expect to observe cells under the microscope. Kanang imong way of observing. Ang imong actual result is we actually do observe cells under the microscope. Then, muna ni imohang scientific argumentation or how the argument is actually assembled. So, by the way, kani nga example diri is kanang sa leaves, kanang sa pag-study nila sa cells in leaves. Then, imuhang we observe a leaf under a microscope and see that it is built from cells. Ang imuhang kani nga mo ni imong evidence which leads to the idea that all life is built from cells. Kay na-answer naman ang imuhang claim or na-answer na imong research question sa imong claim which is naka-observe mo nga ang leaf is under the microscope na nakakita mo og or that the leaf is built from cells. Then sa last one is so we'd expect to see cells when we look at living things up close. So by the use of microscope daw makakita sila og cells under the living things if imo na siyang trying to look up this closely. Then, let's proceed to the kanang assembling of scientific argument. So, it is anang additional ra ni siya sa ato ang kan ang logic of scientific arguments. Though the elements of scientific arguments, which is the scientific idea, expectations generated by idea or relevant observations, are always related in the same logical way. In terms of the process of science, those elements may be assembled in different orders. So, it doesn't matter kung maguna imong observations, ding ulahi imong idea, ding motunga imong expectation, as long as nani silang tulo nga imuhang mga logic, which is if naa kaning tulo, maka-create ka og scientific argument. But it doesn't matter kung asa ang mauna nila nga tulo, which is idea, expectations, and observations, anong body of knowledge. So, to critique argument is also eliminate biases in order to make the argument valid. It should also pass a certain standard to make it qualified for acceptance. So, mo to siya nga, it is necessary to critique scientific argument para ang imong argument, to make your argument valid and mahimo na siya nga qualified for acceptance. Why is it scientific argument important? So why is it scientific argument important? It is because a new idea must be shared, evaluated, and refined by scientific community before it can become part of the body of knowledge that scientists use to help explain how the work works.